Hello, everyone. Enjoy these relaxing yet powerful stories of resilience and triumph. The courtroom was tense, the air thick with anticipation. The judge, a stern woman in her late 50s with a reputation for being unforgiving, peered down at the defendant over her glasses. Her lips curled into a faint smirk as she addressed him. "Miss David Miller," she began, her voice dripping with condescension. "You've chosen to represent yourself in this case. Grand theft auto and resisting arrest are serious charges. Are you sure you don't want a real attorney?" "This isn't a game, young man." David, a scrawny 18-year-old, stood up, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his ill-fitting suit, a hand-me-down from his older brother. He looked like any other teenager caught up in trouble, nervous, out of place, and utterly unprepared. The gallery of spectators chuckled softly, and even the prosecutor, a seasoned attorney with a sharp suit and sharper tongue, couldn't hide his amusement. But David's voice, when he spoke, was steady. "Your Honor, I understand the gravity of the situation. I've reviewed the evidence, and I'm confident in my ability to defend myself." The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. "Confidence is one thing, Mr. Miller. Competence is another. Let's see how far your self-taught legal skills take you." The prosecutor, Mr. Grayson, stood up, smoothing his tie. "Your Honor, the state is ready to present its case. We have overwhelming evidence against the defendant, including eyewitness testimony and video footage. This should be an open and shut case." David's heart raced, but he kept his face calm. He knew what was coming next. He had spent weeks preparing for this moment, studying every detail of the case, every legal precedent, every loophole. He wasn't just fighting for his freedom. He was fighting to expose the flaws in a system that had already written him off. As the prosecutor began his opening statement, David's mind raced. He glanced at the jury, a mix of skeptical faces, and then at the judge, who was already doodling on her notepad, clearly bored. They all thought this was a waste of time. They thought he was just another kid in over his head. But David was about to prove them wrong. The prosecutor, Mr. Grayson, began his case with confidence. He called his first witness, Officer Daniels, the arresting officer. Daniels, a burly man with a no-nonsense attitude, took the stand and recounted the night of the arrest. "Your Honor," Daniels began, "on the night in question, I received a call about a stolen vehicle matching the description of a black sedan. When I arrived at the scene, I saw the defendant attempting to hotwire the car. I approached him, identified myself as an officer, and ordered him to stop. Instead, he fled on foot, leading to a brief chase before I apprehended him." David listened carefully, his eyes narrowing as he scribbled notes on a legal pad. When it was his turn to cross-examine, he stood up, his nervous demeanor replaced by a calm, focused intensity. "Officer Daniels," David began, his voice steady, "you said you saw me attempting to hotwire the car. Can you describe exactly what you saw?" Daniels hesitated for a moment. "I saw you leaning into the driver's side window, holding what appeared to be a tool. You were fumbling with the wires." David nodded. "And how far away were you when you observed this?" "About 20 feet, Daniels replied. David paused, letting the answer hang in the air. 20 feet in the dark, and you're certain you saw me holding a tool and fumbling with wires?" Daniels shifted uncomfortably. "Yes." David turned to the judge. "Your Honor, may I approach the witness?" The judge, now slightly more interested, nodded. "Proceed." If you're captivated by David's defense strategy, leave a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe to RVM for more incredible courtroom moments. David walked up to the stand and handed Daniels a photograph. "Officer, this is a photo of the car in question. Can you point out where the wires are located?" Daniels frowned, studying the photo. "There, inside the dashboard." "Exactly," David said, turning to the jury. "The wires are inside the dashboard, not visible from outside the car. So how could Officer Daniels have seen me fumbling with wires through a closed window, from 20 feet away, in the dark?" The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. The prosecutor stood up, objecting. "Your Honor, this is speculation. The officer's testimony is based on his observation." David didn't wait for the judge to respond. "Your Honor, if the prosecution's case relies on observations that are physically impossible, then their entire narrative falls apart." The judge leaned forward, her earlier smirk replaced by a look of curiosity. "Overruled." Continue, Mr. Miller. David turned back to Daniels. Officer, you also mentioned that I fled when you approached. Did you identify yourself as an officer before chasing me? Daniels hesitated again. I believe I did. David raised an eyebrow. Isn't it standard procedure to clearly identify yourself before pursuing a suspect? Yes, but thank you, officer. David interrupted, cutting him off. No further questions. As Daniels stepped down, the jury exchanged glances. The cracks in the prosecution's case were beginning to show. The prosecutor called his next witness, Mrs. Thompson, the owner of the stolen car. She was a middle-aged woman with a stern expression, clearly upset about the ordeal. She took the stand and recounted her story. Your Honor, she began, I parked my car outside my house that night. When I woke up the next morning, it was gone. I reported it stolen, and later that day the police found it with the defendant inside. David listened intently, his mind racing. When it was his turn to cross-examine, he approached the stand with a calm demeanor. Mrs. Thompson, David began, you said your car was stolen that night. Did you see anyone take it? No, she replied. I was asleep. David nodded. And when the police found the car, was there any damage to it? Broken windows? Forced locks? Mrs. Thompson frowned. No, the car was intact. David turned to the jury. So the car was stolen without any signs of forced entry. How do you think the thief got in? Mrs. Thompson hesitated. I don't know, maybe they had a key. David raised an eyebrow. A key? Do you know how many people have access to your car keys? Just me and my husband, she replied. David paused, letting the answer sink in. Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. No further questions. As Mrs. Thompson stepped down, David turned to the judge. Your Honor, I'd like to call my first witness, Mr. James Thompson, Mrs. Thompson's husband. The prosecutor stood up, objecting. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The defense didn't disclose this witness. David responded calmly. Your Honor, Mr. Thompson's testimony is crucial to understanding the full context of this case. The prosecution has had ample opportunity to investigate. The judge considered for a moment, then nodded. Overruled. Call your witness. Mr. Thompson, a tall man with a nervous demeanor, took the stand. David began his questioning. Mr. Thompson, do you own a black sedan? Yes, he replied. And do you have access to the keys? Yes. David nodded. On the night in question, did you lend your car to anyone? Mr. Thompson hesitated, glancing at his wife. I lent it to my nephew Alex. He needed it for a date. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Mrs. Thompson looked shocked. David pressed on. So your car wasn't stolen. You lent it to your nephew, is that correct? Mr. Thompson nodded. Yes. David turned to the jury. So the car wasn't stolen. It was borrowed, and yet the prosecution is trying to convict me for grand theft auto based on a false premise. The prosecutor stood up, flustered. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. The defendant was still found in the car without permission. David didn't wait for the judge to respond. Your Honor, if the car wasn't stolen, then the entire charge of grand theft auto is baseless. The prosecution's case is built on a lie. The judge leaned back, clearly intrigued. Continue, Mr. Miller. David turned back to Mr. Thompson. One last question. Did you inform the police that you had lent the car to your nephew? Mr. Thompson shook his head. I didn't think it was important. David nodded. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. No further questions. As Mr. Thompson stepped down, the courtroom was in an uproar. The prosecution's case was unraveling, and David was just getting started. The prosecutor, now visibly flustered, called his next witness, Detective Harris, the lead investigator on the case. Harris, a seasoned detective, with a calm demeanor, took the stand and began his testimony. Your Honor, Harris began. We have video footage from a nearby security camera that shows the defendant entering the vehicle on the night in question. This footage clearly places him at the scene. David's heart raced. He had anticipated this. The video was the prosecution's strongest piece of evidence. But David had spent hours analyzing it. He knew there was more to it than met the eye. When it was his turn to cross-examine, David stood up, his confidence growing. "Detective Harris," he began, "you mentioned that the video footage shows me entering the vehicle. Can you describe what exactly is visible in the footage?" Harris nodded. "The footage shows a figure approaching the car, opening the door, and getting in. The figure matches the defendant's description." David paused, letting the answer hang in the air. "Detective, does the footage show the person's face clearly?" Harris hesitated. "No, the footage is grainy, and the person's face is not clearly visible." David nodded. "So, the footage doesn't conclusively identify me as the person entering the car. Is that correct?" Harris shifted uncomfortably. "That's correct, but the figure's clothing and build match your description." David turned to the judge. "Your Honor, may I approach the witness?" The judge nodded. "Proceed." David walked up to the stand and handed Harris a document. "Detective, this is a still image from the security footage. Can you point out where the figure's face is clearly visible?" Harris studied the image, then shook his head. "As I said, the face is not clearly visible." David turned to the jury. "So, the prosecution's key piece of evidence doesn't conclusively identify me as the person in the video. Isn't it possible that the person in the footage is someone else?" The prosecutor stood up, objecting. "Your Honor, this is speculation. The defendant is clearly trying to mislead the jury." David didn't wait for the judge to respond. "Your Honor, if the prosecution's evidence doesn't conclusively prove my involvement, then their case is based on assumptions, not facts." The judge leaned forward, her earlier curiosity now fully engaged. "Overruled. Continue, Mr. Miller." David turned back to Harris. "Detective, did you investigate other leads? For example, did you consider that the person in the footage might be Mr. Thompson's nephew Alex?" Harris hesitated. "No, we didn't. We focused on the defendant based on the initial evidence." David nodded. "Thank you, Detective. No further questions." As Harris stepped down, the jury exchanged glances. The prosecution's case was crumbling, and David was systematically dismantling it. The courtroom was buzzing with tension. The prosecution's case was unraveling, and David's confidence was growing. But the judge, still skeptical, leaned forward and addressed David directly. "Mr. Miller," she said, her tone sharp, "you've done an impressive job so far. But let's not forget the charge of resisting arrest. Even if the grand theft auto charge is questionable, you still fled from an officer. How do you explain that?" David took a deep breath. This was the moment he had been preparing for. "Your Honor, I'd like to call my next witness, Alex Thompson, the nephew of Mr. and Mrs. Thompson." The prosecutor shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. The defense is introducing new witnesses without prior notice. This is a blatant attempt to disrupt the proceeding." David remained calm. "Your Honor, Alex Thompson's testimony is critical to understanding the full context of the resisting arrest charge. The prosecution has had every opportunity to investigate this case thoroughly. If they missed key witnesses, that's not my fault." The judge narrowed her eyes, considering David's argument. After a long pause, she nodded. "Overruled. Call your witness." Alex Thompson, a lanky teenager with a nervous demeanor, took the stand. He avoided eye contact with his aunt and uncle, clearly uncomfortable. David began his questioning. "Alex," David said, his tone gentle but firm. "On the night in question, did you borrow your uncle's car?" Alex nodded. "Yeah, I needed it for a date." David continued. "And what happened after your date?" Alex hesitated, glancing at the prosecutor who was glaring at him. I parked the car near my house and left it there. But when I came back later, it was gone. I thought it got towed or something." David nodded. "So, you didn't report it missing?" Alex shook his head. "Number, I didn't want to get in trouble for borrowing it without asking." David turned to the jury. "So, the car wasn't stolen. It was borrowed by Alex, who left it unattended. And when I found it, I was simply trying to return it to its rightful owner." The prosecutor stood up, his face red with frustration. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant. The defendant still fled from an officer." David didn't wait for the judge to respond. He turned back to Alex. One more question. Alex, did you see anyone near the car when you left it? Alex hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, there was this guy hanging around. He looked sketchy. I didn't think much of it at the time, but I think he might have taken the car. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. David pressed on. And did you tell the police about this man? Alex shook his head. Number, I didn't think it was important. David turned to the judge. Your Honor, this testimony proves that the car wasn't stolen, and it raises serious doubts about the prosecution's case. As for the resisting arrest charge, I'd like to explain what really happened that night. The judge leaned back, her earlier skepticism replaced by genuine interest. Proceed. Miss Miller. David took a deep breath. Your Honor, when Officer Daniels approached me, he didn't identify himself. He was in plain clothes, and he didn't show a badge. I thought he was the sketchy man Alex mentioned, trying to rob me. That's why I ran. I wasn't resisting arrest. I was trying to protect myself. The courtroom fell silent. The jury exchanged glances, and even the prosecutor seemed momentarily speechless. David had not only dismantled the grand theft auto charge, but it also provided a plausible explanation for the resisting arrest charge. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. David's revelation had shifted the dynamics entirely. The judge, now fully engaged, leaned forward and addressed the prosecutor. Mr. Grayson, she said, her tone firm. Do you have any further evidence to present, or do you wish to rest your case? The prosecutor, visibly flustered, stood up. Your Honor, the prosecution rests. However, we maintain that the defendant's actions, regardless of his explanations, warrant a conviction. He was found in a stolen vehicle, and he fled from an officer. These facts cannot be ignored. The judge nodded, then turned to David. Mr. Miller, do you have any further witnesses or evidence to present? David stood up, his confidence unwavering. Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to call one final witness myself. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. The judge raised an eyebrow. You wish to testify on your own behalf? David nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I believe my testimony will clarify the remaining questions in this case. The judge considered for a moment, then nodded. Very well, proceed. David took the stand, sworn in, and began his testimony. He spoke clearly and confidently, his earlier nervousness completely gone. Your Honor, members of the jury, David began. I want to start by saying that I never intended to break the law. On the night in question, I was walking home when I noticed a car parked awkwardly on the side of the road. The door was slightly open, and the keys were in the ignition. I thought someone might have abandoned it or left it in a hurry. I decided to check if the owner was nearby, but when I leaned in to look, I heard someone shouting behind me. David paused, letting his words sink in. I turned around and saw a man running toward me. He didn't identify himself as an officer, he wasn't in uniform, and he didn't show a badge. I thought he was trying to rob me, or worse, so I ran. I didn't know he was a police officer until he caught me and cuffed me. The jury listened intently, their earlier skepticism replaced by curiosity. David continued. When I was arrested, I was scared and confused. I didn't understand why I was being charged with grand theft auto when I hadn't stolen anything. I didn't understand why I was being treated like a criminal when I was just trying to do the right thing. That's when I decided to take matters into my own hands. I studied the law, reviewed the evidence, and prepared my defense, not just for myself, but for anyone who's ever been wrongly accused by a system that doesn't always get it right. David's voice grew stronger as he spoke, his passion evident. This case isn't just about me, it's about accountability. It's about making sure that the justice system works for everyone, not just those with power and resources. I may not have a law degree, but I've proven today that with determination and knowledge, anyone can stand up for what's right. The courtroom was silent. Even the judge seemed moved by David's words. After a moment, she spoke. Thank you, Mr. Miller. Does the prosecution have any questions for the defendant? The prosecutor stood up, clearly struggling to regain his footing. Miller, you claim you didn't know Officer Daniels was a police officer, but isn't it true that you were simply trying to avoid getting caught? David shook his head. No, sir. I had no reason to believe I was doing anything wrong. I was trying to help, not hurt anyone. If Officer Daniels had identified himself properly, none of this would have happened. The prosecutor sat down, defeated. The judge turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've heard the evidence and the testimony. It's now your duty to deliberate and reach a verdict. We will reconvene tomorrow morning for your decision. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. Spectators, reporters, and even a few legal scholars had gathered to hear the verdict. David sat at the defense table, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. He had done everything he could. Now it was up to the jury. The judge entered and the room fell silent. Has the jury reached a verdict? She asked. The foreman, a middle-aged man with a serious expression, stood up. We have, Your Honor. The judge nodded. Please read the verdict. The foreman unfolded the paper in his hands and cleared his throat. On the charge of grand theft auto, we find the defendant not guilty. A wave of murmurs swept through the courtroom. David let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The foreman continued. On the charge of resisting arrest, we find the defendant not guilty. The courtroom erupted. Some cheered, others gasped, and a few shook their heads in disbelief. David's eyes welled up with tears, but he kept his composure. The judge banged her gavel, calling for order. Order in the court. Order, she shouted. When the room quieted, she turned to David. Mr. Miller, you've been acquitted of all charges. You are free to go. David stood up, his legs trembling slightly. Thank you, Your Honor. As he turned to leave, the judge stopped him. Mr. Miller, wait. David paused, looking back at her. The judge's stern expression had softened. What you did here today, it was remarkable. You've not only defended yourself, but also exposed flaws in our system that need to be addressed. I hope you consider pursuing a career in law. We need more people like you. David nodded, a small smile breaking through. Thank you, Your Honor. I'll think about it. As he walked out of the courtroom, he was met with a mix of reactions. Reporters swarmed him, shouting questions, but David kept walking. Outside, the sun was shining and the air felt fresher than it had in weeks. David, a voice called out. He turned to see Alex Thompson approaching, looking sheepish. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get you into all this. David shook his head. It's not your fault, Alex. The system failed both of us. But maybe now things will start to change. Alex nodded, then hesitated. So what's next for you? David looked up at the sky, a sense of purpose filling him. I think I'm going to law school. If I can do this without a degree, imagine what I could do with one. Alex grinned. You're going to change the world, man. David laughed, a genuine, heartfelt laugh. Maybe. But for now, I'm just glad it's over. As he walked away, David felt a sense of empowerment he had never known before. He had faced the system head-on, but more than that, he had proven that knowledge, determination, and a willingness to fight for what's right could make a difference. And for David, this was just the beginning.